Technically, a serial killer is someone who kills two or more people at different times. There's no legal definition of serial murder, but in public consciousness it refers to cases where the person goes on a killing spree where there are many victims. The following list explores some of the most notorious serial killers the world has ever known. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. Number 1. Jack the Ripper. We call him Jack the Ripper, but we don't really know who the person behind one of the older and most notorious murder sprees was. London's Whitechapel district was the infamous location of a series of brutal murders committed by an unidentified killer in 1888. 5 women, all prostitutes, were found mutilated and murdered. Judging by the type of wounds that were inflicted, the police surmised that the murderer was skilled at either surgery, butchery, or using a scalpel. The murderer taunted the community and the police by sending letters that outlined their crimes. No one has ever been identified as the killer. Number 2. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer killed his first victim in 1978 at the age of 18. He was arrested for murder after a would-be victim escaped and led police back to Dahmer's Milwaukee, Wisconsin home in 1991. It was there that some of the gruesome details of his life of killing were seen via photos of mutilated bodies and body parts strewn across the apartment. Dahmer was charged with 15 counts of murder in 1992. In November 1994, Dahmer was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. On July 22, 1994, Dahmer was beaten by a fellow inmate and died from his injuries at Milwaukee County Hospital. Confusion over the death of Jeffrey Dahmer has resulted in many theories, but what is known for sure is that the medical examiner's office ruled his death a homicide. Number 3. Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death, is believed to have killed at least 218 patients, although the total is quite likely closer to 250. He was a British doctor and convicted serial killer who was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2000. Harold Shipman's crimes were discovered in 1998 when an inquiry into the death of one of his patients found evidence that he had murdered her with an injection of diamorphine. He was then charged with 15 murders and subsequently charged with another 22, which resulted in a life sentence. Number 4. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was one of the most notorious serial killers in America. A construction worker known by his suburban neighbors as outgoing, Gacy was involved in politics and even acted as a clown for birthday parties as a teenager. He also was in a local rock band called the Pachucos and frequented bars and dance halls. At the time of his arrest, Gacy was married with 1 child and employed as a construction contractor. Gacy was described by acquaintances as a respectable family man who would host extravagant and expensive parties at his home in an effort to meet new potential victims. He sexually assaulted, tortured, and murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men between 1972 to 1978. Gacy was sentenced to death on March 13, 1980. On death row at Menard Correctional Center, he spent much of his time painting. He was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994. Number 5. H. Holmes. Chicago is a tough city, and for decades, it's had its share of killers. But perhaps none more haunting than the pharmacist H. Holmes, who turned the hotel he owned into a torture castle that became known as Murder Castle. In 1892, H. Holmes constructed his own murder castle on the south side of Chicago, complete with gas chambers, vaults for bodies, and a dissection table. He lured guests and locals into the hotel with fraudulent offers of employment or sold them tickets to staged events that would never happen. Once they were in his grasp, Holmes would torture them and kill them by any means possible to satisfy his sadistic desires. In his second and third trials, Holmes was found guilty of 27 murders. Though he had confessed to killing 200 or more, he died in Philadelphia before ever going to prison for his crimes. Number 6. Pedro Lopez. One of the world's most prolific serial killers might still be out there lurking today. Pedro Lopez is linked to more than 300 murders in his native country of Colombia, and also in Ecuador and Peru. At least 1/3 of those murders were tribal women. After Lopez's arrest in 1980, police found the graves of more than 50 of his preteen victims. He was later convicted of murdering 110 girls in Ecuador and confessed to 240 more murders in Colombia and Peru. The monster of the Andes has such a savage reputation that many people worry he was released from prison just to continue his reign of terror. But even though this is the case, he only spent 20 years in jail before being released in 1998 for good behavior. Nearly 25 years later, his whereabouts are still unknown. Number 7. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy loved the attention his murders garnered him, and many in the United States were more than happy to give him that attention. In the 1970s, the media's fascination with Ted Bundy was at an all-time high. His charisma and good looks were catnip for reporters eager for a fresh story. In 1977, when he was on trial in Florida, his first murder trial since being caught 18 months earlier, 200 journalists from across the U.S. descended on Tallahassee. He was a gorgeous man who had the distinction of being an easy subject, says Roy Mosley, who covered the trials. In one way or another, everyone wanted to know about Ted Bundy. In 1978, Bundy was convicted in Colorado of murdering 9 people and sentenced to death. He escaped from custody but was captured 6 weeks later and given another death sentence. That's all we have for now on this episode of Intense, Insane, and Interesting. Hoped you liked learning about 7 of the most prolific serial killers to ever exist. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, then hit that notification bell. Until next time.